One of my favorite poems is by former poet laureate Joe Harjo. Tables. It starts, "The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of the earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women." In Harjo's poetic imagination, a table is far more than a piece of furniture. It is where we all gather from birth until death to be fed and be part of the human family. The ways that we gather form us and connect us. Whether in Jesus' time or in our own, we all gather at the table. And when we do, we all navigate finding our place. Especially if you are just heading back to school, you know how tricky it can be to navigate a lunchroom or the extending and receiving of invitations to eat a meal together. It might seem funny that Jesus also knew the awkwardness of deciding who to eat with and where to sit, but our gospel today makes it clear that these social situations have always been fraught, especially in a culture that cared as much about honor as Jesus's did, and at a high-profile event like a wedding banquet or a dinner party, you didn't want to end up in the wrong place or with the wrong people. Jesus, though, is more concerned with humility and inclusion than with avoiding a social faux pas. His instructions, whether we are hosts or guests, are to honor everyone gathered at the table, to invite and sit with people we might otherwise overlook, and to not assume that we know what we will get in return. Jesus warns us of following social scripts based on predictability and expectations of return. He knows we can easily fall into using people for what they can do for us, rather than risking a genuine connection. And true hospitality is a risk, but it's one worth taking. As Jeremiah reminds us, by offering hospitality, some have entertained angels without knowing it. And angels or not, when we break bread with someone, we open ourselves up to connection in our common experience. I'm sure you have all been in the situation of being seated next to a stranger for a meal, maybe even at Stories and Lunch this past week. You know the feeling of nervousness, wondering how you will mesh with the people around you. It can be awkward to eat with someone new. But I don't actually think that awkwardness is always bad. In fact, I think there can be a kind of holy awkwardness when we step outside our comfort zones and experiment for the sake of meeting a need or building Christian community. We have to let go of our egos a little bit and wonder what God might be up to. In eating a meal with someone new, feeling that holy awkwardness might mean that you're following Jesus' instructions to not just make yourself look good or eat with the people everyone expects you to, but instead to make room for unexpected blessings. You're willing to be surprised, to offer and receive grace and friendship, as well as food. Stories and Lunch this past week was just one of the many tables I've encountered here at Grace and Holy Trinity. Whether we are being hosts or guests, connecting with familiar faces, or introducing ourselves for the first time, we gather at a lot of tables in our life together here. There are breakfast tables, tables in homes and in care centers. We gather at picnics and socials and cookouts. On Fridays, we gather for Red Door with community volunteers and students and anyone who needs a meal. Sometimes these tables are full of people who know each other, and sometimes we welcome guests and newcomers. Sometimes they hold fancy food and drinks, and sometimes they hold hot dogs and sandwiches. Whatever the occasion, though, I have seen that there is always enough for everyone and a place for everyone. There is a remarkable range of people of all ages and economic classes who gather at our tables. Like all tables, they may be about feeding people, but they are also about belonging and identity. We are formed by one another as we share food at our many tables. And of course, at the heart of it all, we gather around our most important table as a community, the communion table. There too, there is always enough for everyone and a place for everyone. Even though we have a lot of different types of meals together, we gather at all these tables for one simple reason. We get hungry, and we are all in need of being fed. While the gospel today talks about the ways our human tables can be unequal, that is never the case when God is the host. The communion table is one place where we are all in equal need of being sustained and are all equally invited to be fed. We come to it because we are hungry for God. The way we feel that hunger for the Eucharist can take many forms. Maybe we haven't received communion in longer than we would like, and we feel a hunger drawing us back to the table. Maybe there is something we are seeking from God that draws us in. Maybe we are hungry for community, for forgiveness, for blessing, or to feel a tangible connection to God through Jesus' body. God always desires to feed us and meets us in all of these ways, gathering us in community, assuring us of forgiveness, and offering blessing and strength for whatever life brings. We return again and again to the altar for nourishment, and gradually this table too forms who we are. Like children gathering around the dinner table, we eat what we need and are brought further into who we are and who we are being formed to be. Communion connects us to God, but also to each other, bringing together people who might otherwise never meet, and perhaps creating some of that holy awkwardness as we discover our connection to one another. At first, not being sure if we might mesh, and then finding the blessings in being brought together by our common hunger for God. In the gospel today, Jesus is the guest, watching and being watched as the dynamics of hospitality and social rank play out around him. In our meals together as a community, we are sometimes hosts and sometimes guests, learning throughout our lives the humility and inclusion that Jesus teaches. And in this, our central meal together every week, Jesus is both food and host. And thank God Jesus doesn't only invite people who can pay him back. Instead, Jesus takes his own advice, humbling himself and inviting all of us to his table. There, he is a lavishly generous host, desiring so much to feed and connect with us that he gives his own body and blood for our food and drink. There is always room there. There is room for a certain holy awkwardness and not knowing what to expect. There is room for surprise and grace and blessing, because God promises to always meet us at this table. God's table is where we all gather, from baptism until death, to be fed and be part of God's family. At God's table, there is always a place for you. Amen.